Welcome to the Fueling Innovation Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan, and today we are with Toby from Dyna-mo Instruments. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
So, just going to get straight into it because I think you guys have got a really interesting story and your business is very different to anything we've spoken to. Well, anyone we've spoken to. So, tell us a bit about your business journey. Like, how did it all begin? What drove you to start it? I guess.
Coincidence and necessity. So the business started purely because the customers that I was working with at the time needed something which I couldn't buy source in the UK competitively. So I was working for a tech company that made sensors that went on buildings for monitoring tilt and vibration things. And to install them in the UK, you quite often need extra bits. And one of those is called a tilt beam. It's a long piece of metal that you attach the tilt to. And instead of the tilt monitoring its own footprint, it now monitors 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters between the two fixing points. The company was based in Italy. They had tilt beams in Italy, but to get them to the UK was more expensive than the actual tilt beam cost.
Okay.
So in order to sell the sensors, which I was working with them at the time, I made the tilt beams in my shed. And that's where Dyna-mo Instruments came from. It was absolute necessity. And what became very apparent very quickly, so for about a year, I continued to work with the Italian tech company, and Dyna-mo grew out of necessity. There were more things that were needed or more things that were too expensive to source. And the product range started to grow. The interest from other similar businesses that had the same types of problems in terms of things they needed started to grow, and effectively it got to the point when there was a decision to be made. Was it just a thing that was done on the side, or did it become a fully fledged business? And it probably wasn't ready at the point that it became a fully fledged business to do so, but it was a kill it or make the jump. So that was 2022. And at that point, there had to be some more significant strategy behind what we were actually doing, what I was doing. And that's really when the business became more of what Dyna-mo Instruments is now. And took its roots from the fact that there was this gap in terms of things that were needed sat between the technology and the users of the technology, whether that be the ability to connect them together, the ability to install them, other bolt-ons or sensors or things that needed to go with what they were doing. And so that's really where Dyna-mo started to grow into what it is now, which is primarily we're classed as an integrator. So we're an integrated distributor. There are some things we just sell, but the majority of what we do is putting the stuff together because the end users don't understand it. And that's really where the relationship with the university started, because there is this gap between the technology producers, manufacturers, developers, and those that are utilizing it, who that's not their expertise. They need this technology, but it's not their skill set, it's not what they're trained in, and it's become a necessity for them to understand something that's so far outside their comfort zone.
Yeah, it's kind of that whole, it's a bridging thing, isn't it? Because I think it's very easy to know, I need this thing, but if you've got no idea what it's about, or you've got no idea what it is you're actually trying to achieve with that thing, where do you even start?
And that is where our customers sit. So they sit in 3 camps predominantly. They are engineers by trade, but that's geotechnical, structural, or environmental. It is nothing to do with computing, electronics, sensors, sensor functionality, solar power, battery power. So they have this vast growing complexity of technology that they just have no clue about and have no particular interest in. Their interest is in the parameters, the data that lets them then do their job, do the thing they were trained to do. Okay, what is this bridge doing? What is this building doing? How is this weather affecting this environment? But they need the data to do that. And because this wireless technology is growing and expanding and new things coming out all the time, it's not even as if historically they could buy a tool and then reuse that tool over and over again. Every project requires a different architecture, a different integration of things together to make it work. And then you've got to power this stuff. And that's becoming a big part of our business and a bigger problem, which is, well, how do I power something which has to be on 24/7, is wireless, so everything has to have its own power. And we need to be able to get the data to a cloud server, and therefore we cannot have this system go down. So the whole means to make a sensor work is outside the realm of the user of the sensor's understanding. But they're becoming absolutely dependent on that knowledge because you can't take it out of the box anymore and just use it.
Yeah, and I guess with the everything is growing so much, isn't it? Like you said, everything needs to be wireless now, and everything is moving at such a rapid pace now in terms of tech and even just developments and new things coming out all the time. Like, I guess actually where you then sit in this is actually quite now an essential part of that, because people need to keep up.
Yes. Yeah.
And they also need to be keeping up with all these new regulations and all these new requirements and all of these new data sets and all of these new things. So actually, I guess where you fit into that is actually now quite an essential part of that function.
There's this new career, this new job function that has expanded, grown, exists because of this technology, but it doesn't actually exist. It's not yet to be defined. So you had a job title called Instrumentation and Monitoring, I&M engineer. But that was very much when everything was cabled. You had lots of kind of physical networks of things to wire together. Now we've got into a wireless realm. That technology is outside of the scope of what they learned about. And that changes the way that devices work. It changes the way that they're powered. It changes the circuit boards inside them. So even the micro technology that they learned is now more micro and more specific to this. So whose responsibility is it? It can't be the geotech structural environmental engineer, because yes, they're an engineer, but not an electronics engineer. This sits in a completely different realm. There aren't academic courses to learn this. So you can go and study to be a structural surveyor. You can't go and study to be an IoT wireless monitoring engineer. It doesn't exist. So that's, again, part of where the conversations have been happening with the university, is to say, well, we see this gap and we see where the expertise comes from. But part of the challenge in there is, where do I recruit people from who know how to do this thing that 10 years ago didn't exist? There aren't any courses for you to learn how to do it. And at the moment, the only hands-on experience you have is if you've used the kit, in which case you probably don't want to work in a unit building it. You want to be out in the field using it. Or you've worked for one of the manufacturers and therefore you know their system. And that, again, is as much of a problem, because if you only know one system, you then move to another. It uses different wireless technology, different power supplies, different circuit boards, different fitting, different installation techniques. So actually your knowledge becomes very, very narrow to that product and that thing, and not the application.
So from your point then, what does innovation mean to you in your business?
So there's really three parts to innovation. It sits in three pockets. One is what we provide. We're innovating every day because of the need of what we're doing. Prime example today, we're trying to work out how to power something in a way that it shouldn't and hasn't been powered in the past, but because of its location, it has to be. So the integration part of our business means that we're constantly innovating solutions to work out how to do these things, and seeing the new tech arriving and then seeing how that can be integrated as well. But that's more of a kind of practical day-to-day, the job. There's the innovation that sits in understanding where the market currently sits and what's missing. And that is in two elements, which is the other two of the three. One is in the ease for the user to actually understand, deploy, and manage this equipment and technology. Sure. And the other is in the people who understand it and can be the next generation of innovators. And that enablement requires some innovation. As I mentioned, the courses don't exist to teach someone the base principles of what we're doing. So if you want to be the next generation of integrator in the IoT space for monitoring, where do you start? At the moment, it starts with employment, and that doesn't give you that broad scope understanding. So there has to be an innovation in the academic side of how do we train the next generation to hit the ground running with this technology in what is becoming a very large, very critical market. We're talking about looking after the infrastructure of the UK, the rail lines, the bridges, some of the oldest buildings, things that are already beyond their anticipated lifespan.
Okay.
So that's only going to get worse.
Oh, for sure.
And therefore the need for these individuals is only growing, and we have to innovate how we train them. So I see it kind of sits in three places. One is absolutely in our control, which is the everyday. The innovating solutions we can reuse is the kind of the second part. How do we do something which makes it easy for the user? And we've done that with power boxes and some of the installation accessories, that it's now a modular product that we can just keep churning out. But the most important one is where do we actually get the people with the skill set to grow and support with the growing demand?
So obviously, like you said, you're innovating every day and you're coming up with new things and new challenges every single day. But what's something that you've worked on recently that you've gone, oh, look, we've done a thing and that's really intuitive and we're really proud of it?
Well, I think the biggest success that we've seen is taking off-grid solar systems and making them work in a way that the market needs to. So historically, if you needed to power something off-grid in any of the IoT environments, you would buy a solar battery, buy a leisure battery, buy a solar panel. I've seen some where they've just literally covered it in tarpaulin. You're not a solar expert, you're not an electrical engineer, you are trying to work out how to use a leisure solar array to power something off grid. And one of the first challenges that I had with Dyna-mo was exactly that. How do we power this 12-volt gateway offline? So it was building fairly rudimentary solar systems in steel boxes because that's generally what engineers put things in. And over two and a half years, found all the things that was wrong with that caused an issue with them being reusable, that was impractical. And so over the last 12 months, we've moved to what is now a modular off-grid power system. We launched a thing called Powerbox, which is small, a medium, and a large. Small, you're talking about a 50 amp power system that can run a small gateway, your home router, something like that. The largest system is 7.2 kilowatts. In theory, you could charge a Tesla from it. So you can run some fairly power-hungry long-term devices. But this is all low power. And by low power, we mean this is DC, 12 to 48 volts, very slow draw, but is 365 days a year. And we now have these 3 units, which are, you can deploy them as a battery pack, you can deploy them as a UPS, so uninterrupted power. By that, you've got mains power, but it's not reliable. If it dies, we need something to back it up. So our power boxes can be used to take over when the mains dies, or you can plug solar panels into it and it can then run as a solar. And our next evolution of that same thing will then be a hybrid system with wind and looking at hydrogen generators as well, but all sitting in that nice and easy. Engineer walks to site, sits it down, plugs it in, no risk of them electrocuting themselves. And from a fault finding point of view, there's very little that they can interfere with, which makes it really easy for us. If we have a faulty system, swap it out for another one, bring it back, we can fault find it and look at the next development. But that's one of the kind of focus points recently, which has allowed us to go to the market and say, look, rather than just when you need it, we can now proactively offer this to you. And we're now getting IoT companies coming to us saying, well, actually, we'd like to sell your power boxes to power our devices, which has been a new avenue for us. But equally for them, it's meant they can now go to new markets and sell to solutions, environments, situations which they couldn't practically before because they didn't have a way of powering this thing off grid.
That's really cool. I mean, that's awesome, right? Especially when you find another avenue for you to go into that you weren't even necessarily looking for.
Absolutely that. Yeah, and we generally get the comparisons, things like the Bluettis and the Jackeries, as these power banks exist. Well, they do, but until you understand the difference in this technology, your Bluetti and your Jackery will charge your iPhone, it'll charge your laptop. You can run a 240 volt, your home fridge from it. It's designed for that domestic leisure use. We're talking about boxes that sit on construction sites. They get covered in dirt, they get kicked, they get knocked. And they don't need to be able to power a TV or a laptop, or this is powering, it's almost like trickle power, very low voltage. So we need to cram as much power into something as possible, make it as small as possible, but then just trickle the power out of it so that we can run things for as long as possible.
I guess because on those kind of sites, they have quite a hard life, right? Like it's
brutal.
Yeah, like they're in all the elements. Like you said, you've got steelies, you've got all of these kind of things that, like a standard power bank just doesn't come into.
It's not designed for that, absolutely.
No. So obviously that kind of, you've obviously mentioned you've been talking to the university, and obviously there is a challenge in terms of recruitment and what does that look like. So obviously you've worked with the university before. You are in talks, I think you're in talks with them, some of them at the moment.
Yep.
So what is it, how have you found working with the university? Like how is that supporting and helping your business?
So the first project interaction we had, actually what it succeeded in doing was proving that we shouldn't do what we were thinking of doing, which was fantastic, but a bit of an idiosyncrasy. So one of the challenges is not just the hardware, but then once we've got all this data, how do you view it? So where before it might have been an Excel spreadsheet because you were looking at one or two things, now you could have 20 or 30 different parameters, different bits of information from different types of sensor coming in. And how does the engineer see all of that and then present it to their customer? So the first conversation with the university was to say, we'd like to make an agnostic platform that we can send anything to it, any data, and it will figure it out, and then we can present it in a way that makes sense. And And the concept of that was very good. The university completed a feasibility study for us, which was brilliant. And they basically said, their initial approach was, is this remotely possible? Is this feasible, what you're asking it to do? And they came back with a complete breakdown that basically gave us an understanding of how we would do it. We then actually took the first steps in doing that, and in so doing that, then raised the questions, which is where the university had helped, which was to say, is this actually your business model? You're now getting into a completely different field. It's attached to it, but you're doing something completely different, should you be? And very quickly we realized that thanks to the work they'd done and allowed us to see how much work was involved in doing this, it was really outside of the scope and was going to harm us by trying to become a software company when actually we were an integrator. So, and it was that understanding of what they can do in terms of showing us what we shouldn't be doing, or at least give us a viewpoint that we wouldn't take otherwise, which then evoked the conversations to keep going and led to the conversations we're having now, which are exactly as we've talked about, this knowledge gap. So how do we use the understanding that we have from a practical application, the understanding from an academic point of view the university have on microelectronics, wireless communication, structural, geotechnical and environmental engineering, and create a hybrid academic course qualification that allows existing people in the market to get rubber stamped. Because at the moment, you can go to site, you can install this system, it could fail. There is no one qualified to stamp it to say, I commissioned this.
Yeah.
So there's two parts to this. One is to help the existing employment market to get this, a guarantee, a rubber stamp, a competency accreditation to say, I know how this stuff works. And then the follow on from that is to say, well, actually, if we're giving this accreditation to people who are already in the market, we then need to look at taking that further and saying, does this form part of the existing academics? Is it a follow-on? So if you do an electrical engineering course, but you want to do field IoT monitoring as one of the specialities, is you can then go on and do a progressional course which talks specifically about some of the challenges and applications and practical elements.
So I guess that'd be kind of like for people who want to do a PGC for teaching, right? Like they do an extra year.
Yes.
And so it'd be that kind of thing of like, cool, I've got this in engineering, but now I'm going to get this, which will give me that specificism. That wasn't a word. That helps you do that. And I guess that's so different to when people get like a NEBOSH or like an extra accreditation.
Absolutely, yeah.
It just gives you that extra level of, I can do this if I want to, but I've still got the basics and I've got the understanding.
Absolutely. And it's the competency or the accreditation of your competency, which is what's missing at the moment. The worst case scenario, and historically we've had some fairly major infrastructure failures. If you look in Italy, they had the Morandi Bridge failure. Who was responsible for signing off? And actually in that instance, they didn't have a competent monitoring system on there. But had they, and it had failed, who was responsible for that?
Yeah.
And this isn't a blame culture. It's can we be confident this thing is doing what we installed it to do? If there is nobody qualified to say, I've commissioned it and I can confirm it is performing correctly, where do we stand when the number of systems deploying gets bigger? The number of competent individuals to commission that is next to non-existent. And therefore, you're going to end up with instances where, and you then end up inherently getting into a blame culture because it had to have been someone's fault, but all of those who did it saying, well, we weren't qualified, you just asked us to.
Yeah, like we're not really sure, we've just kind of gone with the flow.
Yeah. And when you look at, you cannot put a sensor on the UK rail network without it being accredited, qualified, sign-off by Network Rail. But the people that install them aren't accredited on how the system operates, how it communicates, and how to commission it.
Right.
So there's a contradiction there in terms of some of the controls that already exist, and then the people doing it. Those are qualified engineers who are installing it. They're just not qualified in IoT monitoring systems.
So this kind of leads on to quite a nice thing, because obviously I think some businesses are, I don't want to say nervous, I think they get a bit wary of approaching universities. So I think there is this whole thing, isn't it, of, they do, they teach students and that's what you get a course out of it. But actually, as you've experienced, there is a whole other side to university, which is the benefit to the businesses.
Yes.
So what would you say to a business who might be unsure or thinking about getting in contact with university? What would your advice be?
I'll start on a slight tangent, if that's okay. In that my experience was when I first contacted the university, it was directly associated with Innovate UK. We'd had the theoretical award, but we needed someone to actually deliver and it was the feasibility study. So we approached Northampton University, and I expected to get a knockback. We were a very small business at that point. There was me and one part-time administrator. And my view of the business was that we're not the type of organisation that adds value to working with the university. I see the value to us. I don't see the value to the university. And I was absolutely blown away at how open and receptive and encouraging they were for us to use them and push beyond the realms of what we initially talked to them. If you could do this, that would be nice. In which they came back and said, well, what else could we do? Well, hang on a minute, I didn't expect you to give me 5 minutes.
Give me a list.
And that relationship, we're now, I think, probably 2.5 years into working with the university. And I now have the confidence to be able to go to the university and say, look, I've got this crazy idea. And I don't worry about the pushback because we're still a relatively small business.
Yeah.
So my message would be that actually that there's no reason not to. If there is a value that you can see for your business working with the university, the likelihood is there's a reciprocal value the other way. You might just not realize it. So by starting that conversation, by making that approach, you then encourage their questions, their interest back the other way. And that actually helps your business grow as well, because then you're not just getting what you thought you were going for, you're getting a degree of coaching, mentoring indirectly, but those questions that get asked come from a different mindset, a different perspective. And that's a big part of the value in the relationship is not just the deliverable at the end. We will get this training course. I will be able to hold that and deliver it to people in the industry alongside some support and help from the university. Is that actually there are things that I now do with the business. There's things that I now don't do. There's things that I'm looking to in the future, which have directly evolved from conversations with the university and understanding the resources they have available, their approach, how they're trying to bridge that education to employment gap as well. How do you actually make that transition? So start the conversation, because wherever you think it might lead, it will probably go in a better way than anticipated, and the reception will be welcoming. If there's a reciprocal value there that you might not even be able to see, they'll find it and then work with you to grow.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't, like you said, I think there's always this perception if you're a smaller business or you're a one-man band or, that working with an organisation the size of universities, obviously we're a smaller university, but we're still a large scale organisation, right? That, like you said, that's a whole lot, well, I don't really see, they're not really going to see that. But actually, as a university and our academics stuff, love working with small businesses, because actually 9 times out of 10, you guys are the ones who are coming up with these really innovative little ideas. And I say little, but what you think is a small idea, and actually, like you said, that can be a much bigger thing that you hadn't even seen the scope for. And I think it's something that sometimes people are like, oh, I just don't know. And actually, no, take a plunge, drop an email.
Yeah, I think that's possibly the challenge or the barrier to get over is, well, where do you start? And I have to say that was probably not a fear, but just thinking that you're dropping an email into the ether. That is probably the biggest nervous step, is that I want to do this. You're that busy running a small business, you will probably send one email, you might send one follow-up, and then you'll give up. And if that's not gone to the right place with someone who'll pick it up and react on it, that I think is possibly part of the mindset is, well, I don't even know where to start. So am I going to put my effort into trying to make contact with this huge organization? I don't know where the door is. Yeah. And that is possibly something that, again, from a small business's point of view, is having probably knocked on the wrong door. I was very quickly moved to the right door. The support structure was there to get me to the right people very, very quickly. And then there is this constant hand-holding where I've bounced in of working with different academics, but there's a constant in terms of this team that keeps in contact with me and keeps pushing the relationship.
Amazing. Well, that kind of then leads on to, obviously we've spoken about the fact that, there's clearly a gap in terms of education, things like that. So what kind of skills and qualities do you want to see coming from graduates now?
I think that there's the obvious, which is the skill set we've talked about, which doesn't exist today or is learnt in a different environment at the moment. That I'm very keen to see that there is qualifications that support where the technology is going, especially in this particular market. But I think that's the steps already there to help deliver that. I think the other is, it's the mindset. The transition between the academic education environment and the work environment. One of my most recent employees is a university graduate, and I think what he's struggled with most is the difference between the educational world and the commercial world. And from an employer's point of view, that can be quite frustrating, but equally it's understanding why. You've come from a world where free format was limited because there's a structure, there's a course, there's something you have to deliver. If you're moving into especially a small business, that corporate culture, structure, job description that is absolutely defined doesn't exist. And it's a very fluid environment, as most small businesses tend to be. And I think that openness and willingness to just get stuck in and know that despite the fact you've qualified in A, actually, unless you're going for a very, very specific job within a specific type of organization, in the broader scope of the SME world, the likelihood is you'll take a job and it's maybe 60% of your time is the actual job you applied for. It's that willingness and ability to be flexible, to have that kind of self-drive, get up and go, and to accept that the chances are by the time you finished your qualification that the actual market has already changed, already moved on. So it's the green and eagerness to take the next step of learning. It's not, you've not finished your education. Actually, it's just started. Now it just moves into a business world,
into a different realm.
Understanding how that works. And even with the business courses, that transition between a theoretical business world and the real business world can be quite dramatic. So it's that open-mindedness to really just be a sponge, get in there and understand as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's something I think that we are trying to drive more actually, is that whole get that work experience, do those placements, do those kind of things when you are at university, and that we can support them to do, because actually, like you said, when you then start your first proper job, you have some of that experience already and you have some of that skills. And I think you definitely do see a difference between the ones who kind of do those kind of things whilst they're studying versus the ones who don't. And obviously it's not always that easy. Studying is hard work, right? Doing my master's, it's a lot. But it's those little things, even if you just do a work experience for 2 weeks somewhere, it actually does make a big difference.
Yeah, and I think it's putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. The first few years, not even months, the first few years in a proper job, for want of a better term, you are miles outside your comfort zone. And it's a difficult challenge to take. It affects people personally in different ways, that leap. But it's taking that risk. And I think the work experience, the placements, actually what that does is, as much as what you'll learn on the job, it's that first step in that pain transition, the scary leap into the abyss. It's less scary if you've already been in that environment, you've understood how the dynamic is so different.
So what advice would you give to students or graduates that are thinking about starting their own business?
So this is really interesting because I have someone who works with me who joined to start a new business. So there was an opportunity which sat outside of what we were doing as Dyna-mo Instruments, and I brought a graduate in who basically started doing exactly that. So he has me mentoring him, but he runs the company. It's taught me a lot about what I didn't realize that I'd learned from being in the workplace for the best part of 20 years before I started running a company. And that's the understanding of running a business to the reality is quite dramatically different. Even someone who had worked for 20 years in a multitude of companies, I still hadn't appreciated what running a company meant. However, if anything, the opportunity to do that at a younger age, when you don't have that experience, is you don't have as many commitments and ties and things that make it more difficult. So actually you have a slight increase in freedom to try it. And all I would say is that one is be prepared to have to learn more than you've ever realized in any environment. But if you go into it with that mentality and you accept that you're going to be the idiot in the room for most things that you do, because you are now the accountant, the administrator, the ops guy, the sales guy.
You're everything.
You are absolutely. And that the reality of the fact is that most small businesses do fail. So don't go in with an expectation that you're going to be a multimillionaire within a few years. Don't go in with the expectation you're going to fail. Go with a realization that this is going to be hard work, but the results are up to me, and I'll get out of it what I put into it. So it isn't a 9 to 5. It doesn't come with weekends off, but the rewards for actually getting somewhere with it are completely different to being paid a salary.
Yeah.
Now, I would really struggle to go back to doing a paid job now, despite the fact I work more hours, I earn less money, I'm more tired, more stressed than I've ever been, but it's mine. And it's going in a direction that I can see is going to give it the potential to get somewhere much bigger. And some people don't want their businesses to grow to a huge scale. They're quite happy with something on a much smaller scale. But it's that openness to the fact that you are going to have to be all things, but don't expect to know it all. Don't expect to know any of it. Know that you probably know 1% as you go in, but that's half the fun. It's then you just open up and ask for help from everywhere, the university, the chambers of commerce, anywhere that you can go to ask questions. Put yourself out there.
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
That's been a
really
pleasure.
appreciate it. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you.